In this video, you're going to learn how to create a basic texture image decal using Photoshop, export it, and then import it into Unreal Engine 4 and use that texture image as a decal. So first I'm going to open up this painting, and this is the image that's going to be projected on a wall as a decal. Now before we continue, I want to cover the basics of texture size dimensions. You probably already know this, but just in case that you don't, all of the textures that you create should be in the power of 2 values. Power of 2 values start from 2 and then go up to 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, and so on, doubling each next value. So an example of texture dimensions would be 256 by 256 or 1024 by 1024. And all of these values are in pixels. Now you can have a square texture using the power of 2 values. This would be 128 by 128, 512 by 512, or you can have a rectangular texture, such as 512 by 1024, or any of the variations in between. As long as you keep these values to the power of 2, you can use rectangular textures. Now if you're developing for a mobile device, you should keep these textures as a square. Back in Photoshop, let's go ahead and resize this image as a square. I'm going to use the crop tool, and let's set width and height to 512 by 512. Now we're naturally going to lose some of the image, so I'm going to just put the most important elements of this image and crop it. Now let's do a basic levels adjustment to make the image a little bit brighter. And let's save this. Go to File, Save As, and we're going to save this as a target file, TGA. I'm going to navigate into the Textures folder. This folder has nothing to do with Unreal Engine, and I'm just saving all of the texture decals in one specific folder on the computer so I can find them better. You can save this decal or any other textures anywhere on your computer. You can even save this texture image inside the Unreal Engine project folder. So I'm going to name this Decal Painting. And let's click Save. And I'm going to choose 24 bits. 24-bit means that you will not have an alpha channel for transparency or opacity, and 32-bit will mean that you will have an alpha channel for opacity or transparency. So we're going to choose 24-bit because we do not have an alpha channel for this image texture, and click OK. Now let's go ahead and import that texture image decal into Unreal Engine 4. I'm going to select WOLD decals folder, open textures folder, and click on the import icon. I need to navigate into the folder where we saved this texture into. And in my case, it's inside my projects folder, decals, project files, and textures. And here's the decal painting. Just double click and it will import that texture image into the selected folder inside the content browser. Next, we need to create a material and use that texture image decal as part of that material. So let's go to Materials. I'm going to right click and select New Material. I'm going to name this material mat_decal painting and press enter. Now let's go ahead, double click on this empty shell material, open up the material editor. First thing I need to do is change the material domain to deferred decal. I'm going to keep the decal blend mode to translucent, and we need to use that texture image and plug it into the base color. For this we need a texture sample node. But first I'm going to jump back into the content browser, go into the textures folder, select the decal painting texture. With that selected, back into material editor, I'm going to hold down the T on the keyboard and left click. This will insert a texture sample into the material editor with the texture selected from the content browser. Let me deselect a texture from the content browser, and I'm going to show you another way to insert a texture sample. Go to the palette and under category search for a texture. Then take the texture sample and left click and drag into the working area. This becomes an empty texture sample. Then select the texture from the content browser. Jump back to material editor, and inside the material expression texture base, under texture, use selected asset from the content browser. And this will plug in the texture from the content browser into the texture sample. So let's go ahead, select this texture sample and delete. Now let's go ahead and plug texture sample output, the RGB channel, which is at the very top. Left click and drag right into the base color. And let's apply and save. Now let's use that material decal inside that level. Gonna go to materials and left click and drag the decal painting right into the level. Let's go ahead, rotate it, make sure that the direction arrow is pointing right onto the wall, this blue arrow right here, and make sure that we include this wall inside the bounding box of the decal. Let's go ahead and rotate it, and we're gonna scale this. Let's move it closer to the wall. And now we have our basic texture image decal. Now a few things about using decals as is. First thing you'll notice is when you apply a decal, you will be able to see the wall, the texture of the static mesh behind it. And actually, let me replace this wall with something better so we can see. So I'm going to grab this wall and replace it with a different wall, different material. Now this effect could work on specific decals, but let's say we want this painting to be a solid decal. So let's jump back into the material editor and take a look at a few properties. First is we can change the decal blend mode from translucent to stain, normal, or emissive. You have other options here, but we're going to go into them in the later videos. For right now, we're going to just deal with these four. Now translucent is what you see right now. We can change this to stain, but this only darkens the texture and it modulates the base color. It makes your decal look like a stain, but it still does not solve the problem of having a solid decal. If we change this to normal, this will remove all of the other options and only enable opacity and normal input. So this will work if you have a decal that only uses opacity and a normal input. And for emissive, you only have emissive color input and opacity. Now this will make your decal glow in the dark. And for that to work, we need to plug the output into emissive color. But still, none of these work for what we're going for. So let's go ahead and change this back to translucent. I'm going to disable emissive color. And to make this decal a solid color so you won't be able to see through it, we just need a normal map. Now right now we don't have a normal map created, but just to give you an idea what it will look like, I'm just going to take this texture sample and plug it into normal. Now this is not how you would actually do a normal map, but before we create one, I just want to show you what it will look like. So we jump back in, and now we can see that this is a solid decal and we do not see the texture behind it. Well, it is not completely true. It is almost a solid decal. If I get a little closer at a specific certain angles, you can still see the texture, the material behind it. So if I move this, here's the detail of the material behind it. It still shows up. And here's another one right here. But it's a lot better than using this as is. So the normal map does help to hide and make the decal almost a solid decal, but you will still see some of the texture of the material. So this is the best workaround, and if you do want to have a completely solid object, then I suggest that you do not use a decal for that. But in our case, this will work just fine. So this works, but now we just need to create a normal and plug it in and use it inside the normal property. So for this decal, we're still going to be using blend mode set to translucent, and we're going to create a normal map to plug this in. To generate a very simple normal map, we're going to use Photoshop plugin filter from NVIDIA. To download NVIDIA texture tools for Photoshop to create your own normal maps, go to developer.nvidia.com and follow this link and download to install the normal map filter for Photoshop. And here choose to download Windows 32-bit or Windows 64-bit. And once you download and install the filter, you will have access to the normals filter under filter, NVIDIA tools, normal map. So let's go ahead and create a very simple normal map to use with this painting. I'm going to create a new document. I'm going to set it to 512 by 512. Click OK. This is going to be a very simple normal map that will provide a detailed canvas look to this painting. With the blank canvas, I'm going to generate a texturizer filter. Under Filter, Texture, Texturizer, I'm going to choose Canvas, scaling at 50, relief at 4, light, top right, and click OK. Next, let's go to Filter again, and let's run the Photoshop filter. For height generation, I'm going to choose 3x3. I'm going to enable Invert Y, which inverts the green channel of the normal map. This is very important. In order for the normal map to look correct inside Unreal Engine, you have to invert your green channel. Set scale to 5, height source, average RGB, and alpha field set to 1.0, and click OK. Now here's the normal map. Let's go ahead and save. And I'm going to name this decal_painting_n for normal map, and choose 24-bit. Back in Unreal Engine, let's go ahead, choose Textures folder, import, and double click on our normal map, select it, back to Material Editor, gonna hold T on the keyboard, left click, inserts a texture sample with that normal map already plugged in, and let's take the output of the sample into the normal map. And let's hit apply. Let's take a look at our decal in the level, and now we have a subtle detail normal map and a material decal that appears to look like a solid decal. Now, not all of your decals will require a normal map, but in order for me to have a solid decal, I needed a normal map to make that work. Let's go ahead, save, file, save all. You now know how to create a simple texture image decal, make that decal into a solid decal, as well as how to create a simple detail normal map and use that with your decal as well. In the next video, I'm going to cover a few additional advanced properties and issues that you will experience when you use decals with indirect baked lighting.